Hello and welcome to And the Runner-Up Is. This week on the show, we're talking the 1953 Best Actress race at the Academy Awards, where Audrey Hepburn won for her performance in Roman Holiday. But why did she beat fellow nominees Leslie Caron, Ava Gardner, Deborah Kerr, and Maggie McNamara? We'll explore all this and more today on And the Runner-Up Is. Hello, and welcome back to And the Runner-Up Is. I'm your host, Kevin Jacobson, and we're here talking about the 26th year of Best Actress at the Oscars, which covered the films of 1953. We'll be discussing why Audrey Hepburn won, why the losers lost, and who we think was the runner-up of this Best Actress race. And my guest today is one of the most passionate people I've met on Twitter about film and the Oscars. They've previously appeared on an episode of On Second Thought about Love Story, but now making the big leap to the main show for the first time. Please welcome to the show, Eoin Daly.
Oh my god, that's so nice to say. Thank you for inviting me up to the major league, I guess. Is that a sporting term? I don't know.
Which is not allowed here, so...
Okay.
There's your warning. But yes, thank you so much. You always ask a lot of great Twitter questions, so now you get to be on the other side of it answering the questions. So before we talk 1953, let's talk about Best Actress as a category. Eoin, my first question, what is your favorite Best Actress win of all time?
I found this question difficult to answer just because, there's so many options. So just to, I guess, narrow it down, I decided to pick two. One before I was born and one after I was born.
Perfect.
I feel like that was a way for me to define kind of what I found great in the moment and then what I found great from watching from years past when it first premiered.
Yeah.
And also, I just couldn't choose one. It was far too difficult.
Yeah. 94 to pick from. Yeah.
Yeah. So in terms of best winner, it's an obvious choice, but still I don't necessarily think it's a bad thing. My favorite winner is still, and will probably be for a very long, I can't imagine her being dethroned, is Vivien Leigh in A Streetcar.
Yeah, we just talked about that on the show a few weeks ago, 1951. An unimpeachable performance. Yeah, you can't go wrong with that answer. But what is your most recent one?
Yeah, so my most recent one is, I think about this winner both in terms of the amazingness of her performance, but also the place in her career that this win came in and how kind of it was sort of the peak in her career. She's done the great things since, but I think about in terms of a really great winner, and thankfully it started the new millennium, is Julia Roberts and Erin Brockovich.
Excellent.
Just everything about that performance, it's such a great, it really exemplifies her appeal as a movie star. It's her greatest performance. It's a film that I constantly go back to because of how quotable it is, and a lot of that quotableness isn't due to Julia Roberts, who just delivers these incredible lines and is just so wonderful. And while there were worthy contenders that year, I think that is one of the rare occurrences where the Academy made the completely right choice, both in terms of recognizing a great performance, but also recognizing a movie star at their greatest achievement.
Yeah, that's another win that I find to be just really fun. I can't wait to talk about that year in general. That's a very interesting lineup overall. But of course, we love our winners, but we also love our losers. So my other question is, what would you say is your most heartbreaking loss?
And again, with this question, I stuck to the before birth and after birth just because,
Nice.
even choosing just two is still difficult. There are just so many occurrences of great performance that didn't win.
Yeah.
But when I think about the most upsetting to me before I was born, I have to think about a performance that lost to it, in my opinion, really awful performance, which makes the loss even worse. And that has to be Michelle Pfeiffer in Fabulous Baker Boys.
Yes.
I'm not a fan of Jessica Tandy in general. I've seen both films from her during the Drive Miss Daisy days and then even the early 40s, and I've just kind of been left meh.
Yeah.
So just knowing that Michelle Pfeiffer in her career-defining turn lost is just really upsetting.
Yes. And honestly, like, that's another one where that feels like a defining one, just like a Julia Roberts, a classic movie star moment. And obviously Michelle Pfeiffer had a great 80s, so that would have been a nice time to do that. I have my feelings on Glenn the year before. There are just certain moments in time where it feels like that's the time to reward someone, and then they miss that opportunity, and then here we are all these decades later and they don't have Oscars. So excellent.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, Glenn's also was worth considering for upsetting loss as well, but
yeah.
I assume many people will mention that throughout this series, and
correct.
I mean, you yourself will mention it many times as well.
I'm always forcing it into the conversation, yes. Is there a more recent one too?
Yeah, more recently it's Gabourey Sidibe in Precious.
Ooh, yes.
Yeah, I love Sandra Bullock so much in her romantic comedy films, and then just having to deal with the fact that she's waiting for The Blind Side, which is there's so much to say about it, but I will leave to whomever guests on the 2009 episode to speak on it. It's not comparable to what Gabourey Sidibe is doing. She's just such a fresh person into film. Like, obviously it was her debut, but even it's just such an incredible performance, and the fact that Monique was able to triumph in supporting Gabourey didn't in lead is just still confusing to this day, because I think of them both as equally as incredible and a kind of a duo together.
Yeah, I agree. And it definitely felt like a classic pairing that we get sometimes at the Oscars, like a Holly Hunter and Anna Paquin type of like package deal. Like the two of them wouldn't be as great without the other. And yeah, I agree. But sometimes, as Sandra said in her speech, she was able to just wear them down in the campaign. So it is what it is. But that's one where Gabourey, I really hope, gets a juicy role again. And I feel like Hollywood has definitely failed her to a certain extent.
Yeah,
especially when you compare it to the other, newer person on the scene, Carey Mulligan, from that same year, and all the opportunities she got. It's quite glaring, I would say.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, having watched a lot of the things that Gabourey Sidibe has done since then, she's been just as great in it. I mean, obviously she's much more light in things like, I think of The Big C or the American Horror Story series, but still she's just as watchable in those. And I mean, I love Carey Mulligan, but it is still just so upsetting that what Gabourey Sidibe has had to endure since that nomination 13 years ago now.
Mm-hmm.
God,
yeah,
that doesn't feel that long ago.
I know. Those are very, very good answers. Very, very good. I agree wholeheartedly with those. Not to spoil future episodes, but I'm finding myself aligning with your taste here. So let's get into what we're here to talk about, which includes actually a acting debut, coincidentally. Let's talk about the 26 Academy Awards, this Best Actress race. The nominees were Leslie Caron for Lili, Ava Gardner for Mogambo, Audrey Hepburn for Roman Holiday, Deborah Kerr for From Here to Eternity, and Maggie McNamara for The Moon is Blue, with the winner being Audrey Hepburn. So, Owen, before we break down these performances, thoughts on this overall lineup?
Yeah, I mean, you have such staple actresses of the 1950s with Audrey Hepburn and Leslie Caron and Deborah Kerr, and even Ava Gardner, who, while kind of came into the mainstream in the 1940s was still as prevalent an actress in this decade as she would have been in the decade prior. It definitely makes sense as we are recognizing massive stars at the time. I'll get into my feelings about the particular performances in films as we go through them, but I guess it makes sense. You know, that's something I find myself saying about a lot of lineups in this decade, especially, is the actresses they're nominating make sense. It's just the performances that they're nominating doesn't make as much sense.
Right. Yeah, this is... I'll just come out and say that this is a pretty weak lineup. It also definitely feels like a specific vibe, right? Like, we have a lot of love stories, a lot of younger women, conventionally attractive women, you know, co-lead situations. Some are much better than others, as we'll discuss, but I think it's disappointing overall just to see the lack of diversity in the kinds of roles that the Academy chose to nominate here. You know, we have newcomers, obviously, or we have people really breaking out with, like, Leslie Caron and Audrey Hepburn, Maggie McNamara, her film debut, and then we have Deborah Kerr and Ava Gardner, who were established more or less by this time, but very much also in co-lead situations. So it's a bit of an underwhelming lineup on the whole, but I do think that we are probably going to have a lot of fun talking about these and maybe tearing a few of these movies apart. We'll see.
Yeah, it definitely, like, when you look at the five of them all together, there's only really two types of characters there. You have your ingenue with the scarily kind of similar face, Leslie Caron, Audrey Hepburn, and Maggie McNamara.
Very much
and
so.
then you have the more sex pot role, the kind of, I mean, I would say, well, one is sort of punished for her dalliances, while the other kind of gets this, I guess, happy ending with Ava Gardner and Deborah Kerr.
We'll explore it. Yeah.
Yeah. So it goes. So it's just not exciting, the roles being nominated. And I mean, I know there was a Twitter question about is it the worst lineup ever? I can answer that after we get through the whole lineup.
All right, well, let's just jump right in. Are we ready?
Ready as I'll ever be.
Okay. Well, let's start with a truly wild one. Leslie Caron in Lili. So this is the first of many introductions that I'll be doing on this show because this lineup had so many first-time nominees. So I'll say this. I don't want to, tempt fate, but just for the record, as of this recording, this is the first Best Actress nominee that I'm covering on this series who is still alive. Leslie Caron is still alive. She recently turned 91 years old, so she is one of our oldest Best Actress nominees, still living. And maybe if you're listening years from now, who knows? But I just wanted to mark this occasion. So Leslie Caron, she grew up in France, and she was a ballerina, and she was discovered by Gene Kelly, and he saw her in a ballet and decided to cast her in An American in Paris as his leading lady. So, American in Paris, the Best Picture winner of 1951. That's a big debut to make. And she certainly got to show off her dancing skills and just her musical ability. And she was signed on to a contract with MGM. She made a few films after American in Paris, and then Lili comes around and gives her an even bigger boost in her profile. And the word that I keep seeing over and over to describe her in those early days was gamine. She had a certain style with the short haircut that just gave her a very distinct look. She was cast in a lot of these kinds of waifish roles in these early days. So yeah, let's talk Lili, which I would say is a rather bizarre film, to put it lightly. Very unlike anything I've covered on the show so far, I think. But she's playing a 16-year-old girl named Lili. And Lili is an orphan who comes to this provincial town because it's something about how she doesn't have any family, so she's like an orphan. And she goes on the recommendation of her father, who died, to meet up with this guy. And turns out this guy also died, so she ends up in a carnival, as one does, as part of this puppeteering act, and she just has this very childlike wonder where she seems to lose all sense of reality whenever she's interacting with puppets, and seeming to think that they're real, question mark, even though they're clearly being puppeteered by this guy Paul. And it turns out Paul really likes her, but he doesn't really know how to express himself in those kinds of loving terms on his own. So he uses puppets to develop this relationship with Lili. And also Paul is, when he's not puppeteering, he's kind of gruff and sort of pretty mean to her sometimes when he's just Paul. So a very awkward situation there. Let's talk Leslie Caron in Lili. What do you think of Leslie as an actress, as a screen presence, and what do you think of her here?
It's interesting because I've recently rewatched American in Paris, like I'd say within the past 2 weeks before rewatching Lili, and I just kind of fell in love with that movie all over again, especially that last kind of 20-minute dream ballet, and she has a lot to do in that. And I'm also influenced by the recent kind of Fritz's video on her next nominated performance, and just kind of seeing the history of her career through that as well. And I just she's a fine performer, you know. I guess she does excel in these musical / comedy, can we say?
Sure.
Very
light
fare, fluffy,
trifles.
And Lili is just, I don't even know how to describe it. I mean, you did a good job in describing it, because it's such a strange and really disturbing film.
Mm-hmm.
Like this is my first time watching it. I watched it a few years ago, and this was kind of the nominated turn that I wasn't excited to revisit, because I mean, thankfully the film is quite short. I feel like
80 minutes.
Yeah, I feel like we're an hour longer, which could have been the case. It just could have been. Yeah. I would have struggled even more with it. But yeah, to say Caron is a fine actress. She's not this great performer who I would list amongst the greats ever. Whether that's the roles she herself got to play, I know she, in years recently, has talked about how she always wanted that dramatic challenge, and not playing the, as she refers to them as the Liesel, Lili, and Gigi role, and Fanny roles, I guess, where she's just expected to be this awe-inspired face to react to everything around her. So yeah, it's an interesting nomination for sure. I'm trying to think of a modern comparison to it, and I can't necessarily think of anything at the moment.
I'm not a fan of this movie, and to be honest, I struggle to see what other people see in it, because I've read a fair share of reviews that refer to this as charming and fun and whimsical, and I get none of that. Quite frankly, I'm kind of creeped out watching this movie on many levels. Number one, I mean, I think the way that Leslie Caron, the way that they have her play this character is as if she's just the most naive person to ever walk the planet. Like, can't seem to discern that puppets aren't actually alive. She doesn't really add that much depth or nuance to the role, I would say. I mean, most of the film is just like various men in her life treating her like a rag doll, essentially. You know, all these men that are older than her, and taking advantage of her, and sometimes being violent with her, or they just like manipulate her using puppets because they don't know how to express themselves as like a real human being. Also, the puppets are ugly, and I find them kind of disturbing. I just want to add that.
Yeah.
So,
I mean, Jodie Foster in Nell has more common sense about people's emotions and how to communicate than Leslie Caron and Lili does, and she's basically a mute character who struggles with communicating. That's how kind of odd this character is.
Yeah.
Also, yeah, those puppets are quite frightening, although they are kind of they are kind of like these traditional circus puppets, I find, where they have this really off-putting facial features, but I think what makes it even more off-putting is the way they communicate with Lili. It's so manipulative, and like, obviously that's the story here, but are we supposed to find this growing relationship between the Lili character and the puppeteer enthralling or exciting or passionate? I don't know what is the point.
I don't know, because based on the ending, I think we're supposed to. Like, that's what it feels like it's leading to, and yet I just feel grossed out by the end of this film. But yes, thankfully it's only 80 minutes long, so it's not like it's some long experience that you have to endure on top of everything else. But yeah, I just find very little enjoyment in this. I think, as far as my feelings on Leslie, like, generally speaking, I've been okay with her as a screen presence in these early days, at least. I think she's definitely charming in American in Paris. She's fine in Gigi. Not a big fan of that movie, but yeah, wild, by the way, that she's one of the stars of 2 Best Picture winners, and neither of them she was actually nominated for Best Actress. Just a weird stat.
Yeah, as she will remind you in interviews how she didn't get nominated, especially like American in Paris makes sense because the film doesn't really give her any. I mean, Gigi itself also doesn't give her anything to really perform with, but she's the titular character in that film, so it would sort of make sense for her to get a nomination for it. But yeah, no, it's an odd stat, especially with them being musicals and how infrequently musicals are rewarded in Best Picture. The fact that their leading female star wasn't nominated is an odd occurrence.
I think more than anything, what this performance is kind of an early example of a manic pixie dream girl in a way.
Totally.
She even has like the short haircut, and I think she's also written in a way where I don't really see a real person here so much as like an idea of a cute waifish girl who's very innocent and naive, but she has also like a kind of warm sensibility about her. She's very forgiving as a person, and for me, she's just playing it at that exact same wavelength for the entire film. Like, there's no variation in this performance at all.
Yeah. I think I've sort of thought of a modern example that I could relate to this performance. But it's a much greater performance. Is Sally Hawkins in Shape of Water?
Oh wow!
Because it is sort of fantastical, and the character in Shape of Water does struggle with communication because of her deafness, and that is a much stronger role because they actually give her a character to play.
Yeah,
It's the only recent comparison I can think about is how she communicates with this non-human co-star. I can't really think of many other actress nominees who deal with that. Every time that she stood and just was in awe of these puppets or even performance in general, I just wanted to quickly move away because it just felt so blank. I wasn't getting anything from her, and I could imagine that I can imagine Caron herself just not enjoying playing this role at all. I mean, even in later interviews, she talks about how she was stuck in these boring roles.
There you go.
I can see that through her eyes, how she doesn't believe in this role, you know.
And I think maybe your comparison, Sally Hawkins clearly did believe it, and she made us believe it through The Shape of Water. Personally speaking, because I love that movie. That her performance is the key to loving that film for me. And whereas here, Leslie does not make me believe that Lili would be like so enamored with these puppets to lose all sense of reality. I mean, it's like she's either shy and innocent and she like has her head down and she's like maybe nervous about something, or she's just bright and happy because she's talking to puppets, or she's like being entertained by some magic trick. Like, there's nothing else really to the performance. There's not really that much evolution for her, other than, I guess, maybe one scene where she just decides to confront the magician And she's like, I've put a lot of things together in my head in the past half hour. And like, I thought about how there's a time and a place for everything. And I mean, I don't know. I don't know if I place the blame on her or the script or some combination of both. I mean, what do you think?
Yeah, I mean, there's no way to put all the blame on her because she wasn't responsible for this screenplay. And I want to bring up the fact that there are multiple dance sequences in this film. Mm-hmm. Yes, you forget about them because they're not as magnificent as Caron can be in dancing. Like, it has the elements of an early Leslie Caron performance in how she's this young French girl in struggling. She doesn't have any family that we know of. She's reports to these elderly men. She doesn't have any backbone to stand on. She just is walking through the world blindly aware of the darknesses that surround her. Because when you think about this film, it's so dark, you know. She's this orphan girl who comes to this place hoping for refuge, yet it basically comes to death again with a person who she's supposed to report to is dead. Then she joins this circus to be this sideshow act who is supposed to deliver the same performance every single day, is talked down to so disrespectfully by these puppets every day. And then in the end we're supposed to believe that she falls in love with this man because she just does, because it's a 1950s movie and she has to fall in love with him. She can't have a backbone. She can't develop any standing of her own to go forward independently into the world, because if she does, she will just continue to struggle as she has throughout the whole film.
Yeah, exactly. I just feel like the film really, it just kind of exposes just how little foundation there is for this character, and it sort of inhibits her performance maybe and makes her really have to just play this as this infantilized version of a 16-year-old. And I feel like it would be one thing if she were playing like a 12-year-old even, or if this was just a cast as a child actor playing a child. You obviously take out some of the romantic stuff, which shouldn't be there anyway, as far as I'm concerned, but I just feel like the movie would go down a little better if this was just like a nice, fun little children's movie or something. And I'm not saying like iron out all the messy stuff in a film, because obviously that's like, you know, a slippery slope. But if it's not going to go examined at all, just how icky this whole dynamic is at any point in the film, then that's where I start to have a problem.
Mm-hmm.
So
yeah, it's just an odd film that I feel like people will only subject themselves to because it is a multiple Academy Award nominated. I mean, even an Academy Award winning film.
Yeah.
Oh, it's such an odd thing to experience, and now having experienced a second time.
Sorry.
I hope to never. No, it's fine. I hope to never revisit this film. Hopefully, the bad memories stay in my mind and I don't have to try remember the film.
Yeah. The only other highlight I think for her actually is when she gets fired from her waitressing job because she got like sucked in by this magician and she stopped doing her job. And she goes up to, I think it's to the magician, and he's like, oh, well, whatever, that sucks. And she just has to leave the carnival, like, and she's very despondent. And I feel like there's an implication there that she wants to like climb up on one of those structures and possibly end her life. And that's where I felt like in a more engaging story, we would have gotten more insight into how this girl has just been through all this tragedy. I mean, she's an orphan. All of her loved ones are dead. And now she's in this new environment and she's not really fitting in. And, you know, even if we had just a handful of more introspective scenes or something to really just show how traumatized this girl is and how maybe she copes with it by having a certain innocence and like a brightness to her, then I sort of think you'd have a more compelling story than what we have here. But then things just take a hard turn into her hearing the puppet and it's like calling her name, and she just becomes drawn into that. And again, she's back to playing it like even more like a little girl with no discernment of anything. And it just loses me after that.
Yeah, the fact that this film got so close to Best Picture nomination this year is so, it's almost laughable. I'm trying to imagine Best Picture nominated Lili as a thing of
Jesus.
1953. It's already bad enough that it got not recognized for directing and writing when this film struggles in both of those arenas.
Yeah.
I mean, thankfully it was a short 80 minutes, or
Right.
I would have just had a breakdown.
Yeah. I mean, the whole storyline with Paul, like, I get it. He's been through some tough stuff in his own past, and he doesn't want to be, like, doing this puppeteering thing. He wants to be a dancer, but he doesn't really treat Lili very well, despite really liking her. And the reason he likes her, I don't even know, like, what that is. It's just maybe her innocence and her more, like, little girl qualities, which just skeeves me out, you know? And
Yeah.
when the magician, like, forces himself on her and Paul is catching them and he ends up slapping her and he's, like, calling her an idiot, and I'm just like, how are we supposed to find any of this satisfying or a happy ending when she ends up running back to him in the end? And it's like this beautiful MGM sort of romantic ending, and I'm like, there's no foundation for why this would be satisfying.
Yeah, we've so, like, even in the beginning of the film, we have the man who now owns the shop she was trying to find a relation, force himself on her.
Yeah.
And we only hear it through just them speaking in the background, and the fact that she almost isn't believed. It's so disgusting.
Yeah.
And it's supposed to be presented as this, oh look at Lili, you know, walking through the world. Oops, oh my god, I got a pass made at me. Oops-a-daisy. It's as wee and twee as a lot of 1950 movies I don't enjoy.
Right. And of course, in the end, she has some sort of hallucination where she sees the puppets being life-sized and they're, like, walking down like it's the Wizard of Oz, and I'm just, like, creeped out by this entire thing. And I think this is all supposed to represent, like, oh, Paul has these bad qualities, but it turns out he's also been behind these puppets who have had a positive relationship with. And when she's, like, dancing with her, like, sure, she's a very good physical actor, and you certainly see the dance background here, but story-wise, I can't get behind this. And I feel like she didn't really even get behind it as much, which is why we don't have a lot of positive things probably to say about the performance.
Yeah, no, absolutely. It's a really disturbing film and a very lackluster performance that it's just, for me, one of the weaker nominees of the category's history.
Exactly. So I'm pretty much done with Leslie Caron here. Do you have anything else?
I do hope that your announcement that she's still alive at time of recording doesn't jinx
oh no.
Leslie Caron. I mean, knowing that she would go on to something like The L-Shaped Room, which is a much stronger nomination, is a nice thing to think about. And no, I mean, her career didn't really have many highs. Probably the most known film she'd done in her later lives is Chocolat, where she's such a minimal role.
Yes.
So,
speaking of 2000, the Julia Roberts year. Yes.
Yeah. Or she would go on in her later life to win an Emmy Award, like many famous actresses of yesteryear did for Law and Order SVU.
Yes. And I remember that episode, and she was really good, and she deserved that win. I'm just gonna throw that out there. So yes, we definitely have a stronger performance to look forward to in literally, I think it's 10 years, 1953 and then 1963. So there you go. All right, let's move on to Ava Gardner in Mogambo. So this is, I think, one of those examples of an actress who had a pretty strong presence in Hollywood, who made quite a few memorable films, only getting the one Oscar nomination, And another example I think of this is like Alana Turner, which we'll get to in a few weeks. But yes, Ava Gardner, pretty notable actress in the 40s, 50s, 60s. It's hard to not also mention that she was just one of the most, classically beautiful actresses of the time, considered a pinup, and it's not a surprise to learn about her origin story of how she got in the business, which is that her brother-in-law was a photographer and took a photo of her and hung it up on Fifth Avenue, and one thing led to another, and she found herself being wooed by Hollywood, and she did have to be trained in a number of areas, from what I understand. Like, she had a thick accent, a southern accent, and people in the business found it to be a little incomprehensible, so she had to sort of flatten that out a little bit. She also had singing lessons, so she was kind of molded to be a star. And either way, it was thought that she had the right look to be a movie star, which ended up being true. So her first big breakout was in The Killers in 1946. Very good film noir with Burt Lancaster, and that really helped to propel her to these more prominent roles like Showboat and Mogambo here. So let's talk Mogambo. It's actually a remake of a movie called Red Dust from the early 30s, which also had Clark Gable in it. And we have Clark Gable here playing a big game hunter in Africa. And he meets this woman named Eloise Kelly, who goes by the nickname Honey Bear, played by Ava. And she's come to this outpost to meet Maharaja, but that turned out to be a bust. So she tries to leave, but the ship situation doesn't really work out, so she has to stay with him for a while. They also meet this husband and wife played by Donald Sinden and Grace Kelly. More of Grace Kelly in the next episode. She also gets a supporting actress nomination here, we should say. And the two of them are sort of hoping to record gorilla noises on this safari, and the wife, Linda, played by Grace Kelly, develops a relationship with Clark Gable's character, Vic, which causes some friction, and that's essentially what the story is. So yeah, I also just wanted to mention that Ava Gardner had some romances and connections with a few notable men of the day, like her long friendship with Howard Hughes, which is seen in The Aviator. Kate Beckinsale delivering one of her better performances there as Ava. She was married to Frank Sinatra, and she helped to use her sway to get him into From Here to Eternity. More on that later, which obviously worked out well for him. He won an Oscar. So, I mean, she was a pretty big name at the time. And like I said, this is her only Oscar nomination. So, yeah, what do we think? Thoughts on Ava Gardner as an actress, as a presence, and her performance here?
Yeah, Ava Gardner, she's absolutely what you would define as a movie star. I think of her more as a star than I think of her as a great actress.
Right.
That's not necessarily saying she's a bad actress, because she's not. Because I feel like if she was, she wouldn't be as impactful on the industry as she was. In speaking specifically about her performance in Mogambo, I feel like to start the conversation, I need to first mention that the previous adaptation, Red Dust, is a much better film, starring, as you mentioned already, Clark Gable and Jean Harlow and Mary Astor in the Kelly and Gardner roles. I find it a much greater film. It's a pre-code film, so that maybe is why it's a bit better than this film, which obviously is still made during the time of the code. The introduction to Gardner's character is very interesting. She's introduced more by the clothes she's previously disrobed from.
Yes.
She's your typical kind of loose woman, for lack of a better word. But I think what makes this a more unique turn is how she really nails the comedic beats and the more natural beats of this role. It's dramatic, but it's also very relatable. Yeah, Ava Gardner is sort of the reason to watch. She really steals the film from basically everybody else in the cast. She somehow makes John Ford look better with this, I guess, let's say, international holiday excuse to make a film. But yeah, no, I do enjoy her in this. I think Ava Gardner, it's sort of hard for me to think about what is her really, really defining role. Like, what is the film that I constantly think about? Because she never really was given characters that challenge her like her contemporaries did. I think of you mentioned Lana Turner. Ava Gardner doesn't have A Postman Always Rings Twice,
right, or
An Imitation of Life. I think of Rita Hayworth as well.
Oh, yeah.
Ava Gardner doesn't have a Gilda.
Mm-hmm.
She just doesn't. I don't know why she doesn't have this one iconic role for me, and that's why I don't think of her necessarily as one of the greater actresses of the time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's fair. I mean, I generally like Ava Gardner. From the performances I've seen of her, I haven't seen that much, to be honest, but she definitely has that striking movie star beauty, and I do think she has real charisma on screen, and that's something that's definitely needed in a movie like this, which I think would have been a complete snooze without her. I think Clark Gable is basically on autopilot at this point, really giving us nothing. Grace Kelly is fine, but it's kind of a stock archetype, I would say, and she doesn't really get much to sort of transcend that, so I don't really think that nomination was warranted. But I think the film, for what's been described as an adventure film, is surprisingly slow, I would say. So that's why I say thank God for Ava Gardner here, who really injects a lot of life into the film, and she's this really great wild card, I would say, for what very easily could have been a very dull story about a husband and a wife who go on safari in Africa, and she finds herself falling in love with the big game hunter, and it becomes a love triangle, and it just plays out very predictably. But instead, it's like we have this other person here who she's come into the lives of these people despite not really wanting to be there, and she has like a street smart way about her where she's definitely the smartest person in the film, I would say. She's the most observant, sees what's going on with Clark Gable and Grace Kelly, and I think you always feel like you're on her side as the person just observing this kind of drippy romance that's bubbling up. And a lot of that is a credit to Ava. I think there's just a lot of looseness in her body language, and there's just so much confidence there that you feel like you're in good hands with her to be like the entry point into the story.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the scenes that Ava Gardner and Grace Kelly act in together, it's like no question who's the greater performer. Grace Kelly is just, whether it's the character or her kind of newness to film acting, is very stilted and very stoic and very kind of one note in her emotional changes, whereas Ava Gardner, as you said, is just really feeling this role. I really enjoy her physicality throughout. She constantly has attitude, kind of walking slow, like I don't know how to describe the way she saunters around the film space. Yeah, the way she constantly has her hands on her hips. Like, Ava Gardner makes this role into a character that, if the ending was slightly different and she, for spoiler, I guess, doesn't return to the Clark Gable character, I'm totally not worried about what this woman is going to do in life. I think the better ending would have been her leaving him in his mistakes and her just going off and becoming this fantastic woman.
Yes. And I feel like that would have been totally justified in the end after everything. But yeah, I actually found this to be a kind of performance that you would maybe find in those early days of the silent era, transitioning to the talkies, like that era. The one that really came to mind for me is like Gloria Swanson in Sadie Thompson, which is another film about a woman in this unfamiliar location. She's been around the block, you know, but there's also like an easiness there and an openness with her expressions that it really does make her quite captivating, you know, even within this story and a dynamic that feels pretty simplistic and at worst kind of sexist. You know, this whole setup of Grace Kelly as like the pure virginal one, fair haired, always wearing white, but then you have Ava Gardner with like the dark hair, more overtly sexual. Like you said, the first scene of her is of her showering outside. It's kind of like a Madonna whore sort of dynamic that we have in this film.
Yeah, but I feel like Gardner doesn't fall into the trap of playing this simply sex-forwarded woman, as, say, Grace Kelly does, and falling into this really innocent, almost ice, almost frozen, frozen, basically, woman, frigid, for lack of a better word, I guess. Gardner just, like, she really, thank God she was there, because this would have been, again, another struggle bus.
Yeah.
A nominated film to have to revisit. Like, I even think of the photography of the film. Like, obviously they shot on location. This wasn't shot on a sound stage, and I just don't care. Other than scenes of Ava Gardner interacting with young elephants,
Yes,
or young
I love
animals
those.
in general, or basically her just interacting with any animal. Even the later scene of the cheetah entering her tent. Just give me more of those scenes. Just really, like, push Grace Kelly to the side and give me Ava Gardner in the middle of this country studying animals. Give me that movie, and I
Absolutely.
would love it. Especially with, I think the word to use to describe this performance is broad, both in terms of the type of character she's playing and how kind of open she is to reacting to everything. She finds, I mean, I know it's a little quick cutaway scene, but I think of her falling over in the boat and her legs just flung up in the air as she sits beside Grace Kelly. Is just such a lovely comedic beat that I wouldn't have expected from this type of movie. But Ava Gardner really delivers those unexpected moments very well.
Yeah, a good physical performance here. So I think, just to sort of go through the plot a little bit, I think the first hour or so before they go on the safari, she's pretty much the only person who's really sustaining my interest. I think, honestly, she's even able to make this relationship with Clark Gable's character work, for me at least, just to a certain extent. Not saying it's like an all-time romance or anything, but the way that the two of them sort of spar with each other, it makes them feel like partners in a way. Like, she has these little moments where she's kind of annoying him, like when she's chanting along with, you know, the Africans when they're pulling a baby elephant out of a hole. And, you know, there's other, like, she's saying she wants to get out of here even if it's on roller skates. Like, she's just very uninhibited, and she says whatever's on her mind. And then, of course, they end up kissing, which seems kind of fast, but whatever. But she goes away on the steamboat with the intention of never coming back, and she's gone for like 15 minutes or so. And yeah, I don't know about you, but I was really missing her presence during that time where, you know, we're meeting this husband and wife, and I just really wanted to be where she was, you know, on this ship that would eventually be wrecked or whatever. Like, what is she doing out there? I think one of my favorite scenes in the film is when they're at dinner and she's just being a little stinker, you know, and she's like mentioning how like proper everything is now that this husband and wife are here, and she's like pouring her wine and making these little comments, and it's really where like the group is bonding and like calling each other by their nicknames, and she's very much like, and honey bear, you know, just being like a little bit of a nuisance, like really just making people squirm, and she's just loving every minute of it. I mean, I don't know. It's a classic kind of almost like a sitcom type of setup, really, where you have like this one person who's totally uninhibited, will say whatever she wants, but there's such a knowingness there to what she's doing, and I think she just brings so much charm to it. And yeah, I think it's also a great contrast to what another nominee is doing here, which we'll get to, which is a character that says whatever is on her mind, but there's a world of difference, I think, between what these two actresses are able to do with these kinds of characters.
Yeah, I mean, I would allow the Eloise character played by Ava Gardner to just basically tell me everything that could improve me as a person. Like,
yeah,
and I would feel it done in a respectful way and a very needed way. Yeah. And that's not something you can say about a lot of characters. But she does kind of have that outwardly confidence, and sure, that's the character she's playing, but I don't think many other performers could have played it the way Ava Gardner plays. Even though I did start this talk about her performance not necessarily being the greatest fan of her acting prowess. I think she really brings that movie star charisma that not many people have to this role, and it is such a successful turn.
Yeah, definitely. You know, I think another good example of that is even just the smaller moments, like when they're on the safari and Grace Kelly is really just like making a whole show of the whole like, wow, ooh, ah, look at all the animals. And Ava Gardner just gives her this look in this one particular moment. It's just very much like, is this bitch for real? Like, which, yes, maybe speaks to the whole issue of like, why are these two women supposed to hate each other so much? I'm not really sure, but I will just say that I'm always really on her side in most of her observations here.
I mean, I guess the hate does come in a way that film history and media in itself can never have two women getting along. It always has to be some sort of competition.
Yeah.
But in saying that, if I were the Gardner character and I saw how the Kelly character was carrying on, I too would question, why is she here? Who does this dumb person think she is? Can she leave,
right.
Please?
Yeah. So yeah, I get it. Right. But we do actually get a more vulnerable scene for her a little later on, which is where we have this part, like in the beginning, we have one of Vic's men talking about how like she has scars. She has these emotional scars. And she sort of indicates that she's not ready to go there yet. And then later on, we have this guy asking her about her scars again. And she finally is revealing to him that her husband was in the war and he put the name Honey Bear on his plane, but he got killed. And even though it was a short marriage, like ultimately she has this very delicate line reading, I think, where she says, you know, as short as it lasted, it was like being blessed for a lifetime. A decent enough dramatic scene from her where she's getting to open up, really sort of color in some shadings to this character of her past. I don't know if we need it necessarily, but what did you think of that scene? Because it's quite a contrast from everything else she's doing.
Yeah, I mean, it is. I can appreciate the contrast of it because you want these female characters, especially in this decade, to sort of be fully well-rounded, which a lot of them aren't.
Right.
I think the Kelly character is a massive example of this. It's a nice moment for Gardner, but when I think about this performance, I think more of the confidence that she expresses, and I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing for a character to be totally built on confidence. We don't always have to have the woman who has these inner struggles. She presents confidently to the world, yet, oh no, she has these dark sides to her too. I don't think every female character has to have that. I think it's okay for us to have characters that simply, I guess to a previous guest, to use her term of phrase, Chels, Ava Gardner in this movie is very much a hot girl.
Oh my God, absolutely.
And I think she should just be allowed to be hot.
Yeah.
And we don't have to explain this deep, dark past that she has.
Right. I agree. I think kind of like what I was saying, like it gives her a good opportunity to do something else, but I don't really know if it's needed. So, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And ultimately we get this rather chaotic ending, I would say, where, you know, she's getting drunk with Vic and they have like a fun, easy time together. And then in comes Linda, looking like she's in a jealous rage, and she ultimately shoots at Vic, and so Honey Bear just improvises this whole thing of like Linda's husband comes in and makes it seem like Vic was like just taking advantage of Linda and she was just defending herself, which is what allows the marriage to be preserved. The ending to me is a little weird because it's like it's a pretty big moment on paper, but it doesn't necessarily feel like a climax necessarily. It also feels very clumsy in the way that it's sort of executed. And it just sort of happens, and then there's only one more scene after that, and I'm like, oh, okay, great.
Yeah, I think if maybe Gardner had better co-stars in this moment, it could have worked more. I know I keep harping on about how I just don't enjoy Kelly in this movie. I really don't, and I can enjoy Kelly. I think the next 2 years, especially her work with Alfred Hitchcock, really provided a different context for me to view her in. I think she's much better in those movies, even in High Noon the year prior.
Yep.
When she's asked to play less, I think that's when she's asked to play less, it's a much more effective turn. As opposed to this, where she just is totally not able to properly deliver the emotional punch that this somehow betrayal from the Gable, this, I guess, surprising to her, betrayal from the Gable character is supposed to be. And even, I mean, Gardner, even in that sort of the way she improvises, is very funny to me as well, where you like, it is such a natural way that a person in a situation like this would improvise a solution. But yeah, it is such a very odd, I mean, I guess it makes sense for how this movie is supposed to end, where the marriage is intact and the other part of the love triangle ends up together, but it just sort of rushes the ending.
Yeah.
I think they expect the scenes between Gardner and Kelly to sort of build up to this moment where the women have conversations about the Gable character, but just those scenes just don't work as well.
No.
Because they're just a lot of talking, and I just can't fully pay attention to them. So yeah, it is a very clumsy ending.
Yeah. It felt like entire scenes were missing, honestly, by the end, to really give this some more dramatic heft. And so, yeah, she makes a decision to stay with Vic and live happily ever after, I guess, which on some level I'm like, girl, you can do a lot better than this guy, honestly. You know, you've just been through this whole experience where he almost broke up a marriage, and now you want to be with this guy who doesn't really have a whole lot of other redeeming qualities. But by the end, I'm sort of left disappointed with a bit of a sour taste in my mouth, much like Lili. But at least it's saved by her very unique energy and charisma that she brings to it, unlike Lili. So for that reason, I would recommend Mogambo just to watch Ava Gardner. The rest of the movie, not so much.
Yeah, if there's someone out there that can make a cut of this movie where it's just Ava Gardner,
I like that.
I would wholly recommend this film to them. But I think if you're going to watch this story, you're better in watching the 30s version.
There you go.
I mean, I love Ava Gardner in this, as we've talked about, but I think it's always nice to experience Jean Harlow and Mary Astor, who are greater actresses in my mind. And sure, Jean Harlow is just as much a movie star image as in the 30s as Ava Gardner was in this period.
Yeah, so there you go. Let's move on, shall we?
Yeah.
All right. Deborah Kerr in From Here to Eternity. Very excited to be back talking about Deborah Kerr, one of the classic bridesmaids of old Hollywood. 6 nominations, no win. Even though I think she got close a few times, perhaps this is one of them. We'll get into that later. But yeah, this is an interesting turn for Deborah because, you know, her Hollywood image, I would say, was more elegant and good girl. So a little bit of goody two-shoes feeling. Didn't really get a lot of chances to play more sensual kinds of roles. And I think she saw From Here to Eternity as a great opportunity to show her range and show that, you know, she could be a more sexual person on screen, and doing a big sort of prestige picture here based on a popular novel had a lot of great elements. But as it turns out, they wanted another big actress for this part, Joan Crawford, our old friend Joan. But apparently Joan kind of caused some headaches behind the scenes because she wanted to have her own cameraman and she was very particular about being framed in a particular light. She also didn't like the costume she was being asked to wear, so she was replaced with Deborah Kerr. So let's talk about it. From Here to Eternity, it isn't exactly about the Deborah Kerr character, fair to say. Except the parts where it remembers that she's there. But yeah, it's about the lives of these army soldiers that are stationed in Hawaii around the time of the Pearl Harbor attack. We can more or less, I guess, avoid the parts that aren't involving Deborah's character, even though that's quite a bit of the film. But Deborah plays Karen, who is the wife of the captain, Captain Dana Holmes. She has a very unhappy marriage with him, and she decides to engage in an affair with Milton Warden, his first sergeant, played by Burt Lancaster. And they make out in that very famous shot at the beach with the waves crashing over them, and they just try to figure out what their future is going to be. And there's some conflict there because he doesn't want to become an officer, which would, I guess, let her really be with him and then divorce her husband. That's pretty much it. That's the storyline for Deborah Kerr in this film. So, yeah, Deborah Kerr is only in 20 minutes of this 2-hour film, so she has by far the least amount of screen time for any of these nominees. One of the least of all time in Best Actress also. But I guess the question is, does she make the most of it? What do you think? What are your thoughts on Deborah and this role?
Well, my thoughts on Deborah is I adore Deborah Kerr. Previous to this, her work with Michael Powell and America Pressburger are just magnificent films. Mm-hmm. They totally understood what type of actress she was. I especially think of Black Narcissus, which is just an incredible performance that sadly didn't result in an Oscar nomination for her. But yeah, this definitely is a very pivotal role in the career of Deborah Kerr. Her career wasn't the same post this film. She did, as you mentioned, she was very much the demure English Rose sort of characters before she played nuns. She played these great performances, but not very adventurous characters, whereas Karen Holmes is a much more outwardly expressive role. She is first introduced through Photo on a Table, but when she first arrives on screen, Kerr totally gets what character she's playing. This was the performance that I necessarily didn't fully remember from having previously watched this film, but this time around I was just totally in it. I think the first hour is where she gets to shine up until the end of that beach scene where she has that massive revelation about her history. I think you could argue that she is a co-lead in the movie up until the end of that scene, and then you have basically the rest of the film, which goes more into the other members of the cast, even the other female character, the other kind of, I guess, major female character in Donna Reed, in her relationship with men. But back to Kerr, I think she's incredible in this. I can't imagine Joan Crawford, especially as a blonde.
Yeah,
that's just not an image that I can think about. I think the fact that Deborah Kerr is known for her red hair makes the transition to a blonde much more believable. I can't imagine, especially Joan Crawford's eyebrows with blonde hair. Absolutely not.
What a look that would be.
Yeah, that's just not something that I would want. But no, I think Kerr is really good in this. I think what helps her performance be much more effective is she matches her co-star Burt Lancaster beat for beat, as opposed to, say, Donna Reed, who is outacted off the screen by her male co-star Montgomery Clift. I hope we can get into him, even though we're here to discuss Deborah Kerr.
I'm always here for more Monty talk. Yes.
Yeah.
Definitely.
But no, it's an incredible performance, and I just wish there was more to it. That's my main criticism is I just want more Karen. I never thought I'd say I want more of a person called Karen, but I do in this film.
Yeah, I have to be honest. I've obviously seen From Here to Eternity before, but I really kind of forgot how good Deborah Kerr is in this. And yeah, it's probably because I really wouldn't classify this as a lead performance, and the film has quite a bit going on with Montgomery Clift and even Frank Sinatra and this whole other main storyline that she's only kind of related to, but not really. But yeah, I think this is a really good example of an actress really bringing the most to a part that very easily could have been unmemorable or dull. And I think what she really does is just give this character so much life and a history and a depth, even in the quieter moments where, you're seeing this woman who's not exactly thrilled with how things have turned out in her life, and she's married to this captain, but it feels more like an arrangement than anything else at this point, and they're just sort of staying together out of custom. And they have separate beds, as she references her past and how she got pregnant, but she had a miscarriage, and now she can't have any more children. Actually, somewhat of a similar situation as Shirley Booth in Comeback Little Sheba, which we just talked about. Also had Burt Lancaster as the male lead there. But yeah, there's just that sense of like regret and past trauma, and I think that what she's able to do is just show this woman who definitely projects a certain confidence, but is also tormented really by her past, which from the very first scene when she's walking up to the office and, Warden is talking about her with the other men, and she just walks up to them and they have like this back and forth, and she's asking like, what makes him so efficient? And he says he was born smart. And she says, I love that, and she just has like this quick look when she clearly has some level of feelings for this guy already, not necessarily that they have a history, but this isn't their first conversation, but she just does a lot with her eyes, I think, to just show that desire, and also maybe even just a bit of insecurity too, where she's like looking around a little bit as she's talking to him, like she doesn't want to get caught. I think there's something that's just in the way that she plays it, and also, to give credit, just the way she's styled, where she just looks incredible, and I find her so compelling, and I want to learn more about her. It's, just from that first scene, it's such a great tease that makes you want to sort of lean in a little bit, because this is her first scene, and yet she's making this big impression as this woman who clearly has some level of control in her life. She's the captain's wife, but there's also part of it where she feels stifled by it. And I think she definitely captures the sort of duality of that very well, which she would do in previous roles, as you were saying, with Powell and Pressburger. So I think this is a role that really highlights her strengths, even if it doesn't give her enough to do.
Yeah, I mean, I will agree. I think this is the best she's ever looked on film.
Absolutely.
And that's, I kind of feel conflicted in saying that, because she's not acting with her natural red hair. she's definitely playing this bombshell figure that obviously, I guess this year begins the kind of breakout of the Marilyn Monroe bombshell. So yeah, she's just incredible. She looks incredible in this film, and that first scene is such a great introduction for her. Like the way, even just the confidence of the way she swings her bag as she walks into her husband's office, and you just find her she's constantly, everyone's talking about her. And Deborah Kerr's eyes are really a very big part of her acting, totally. Whether it's in this film or films she'd make before or films she'd make after. Everything you want to know is going on in those. What eye color does she have? I want to say, I don't know, it's like blue, or I guess in this movie it doesn't matter because it's black and white, but like everything that you need to know about the character is present in her eyes.
Right.
She's not just she's just incredible in this movie. And I guess we can get into the like major sequence of her performance, which is the beach scene.
Yeah.
Because that scene leads to her dramatic reveal about her past, and it's just such a heartbreaking moment for her. Mm-hmm. Like you witness her first experiencing such sexual joy as the waves crash upon her in Lancaster on the beach, and then he so quickly changes the narrative when he questions her about previous relationships she's had with other men besides her husband, and then you obviously get this incredibly devastating story of the loss of her child and how she's been cheated on by her husband, and how unfortunately the men in her life can cheat on her, yet she is called out for it because she's a woman in the 1940s. Mm-hmm. God, I was about to say 1950s, but no, it's about Pearl Harbor, so it's the 1930s/40s. Yeah, she's just incredible in that film. I mean, I will say a slight negative about her performance is the American accent is it kind of comes and goes, you know. It's not the strongest, but that doesn't necessarily provide a major negative on the performance for me. I think that scene she's just incredible in. That it is sort of unfortunate that after the beach scene, we kind of lose track of her for a very long time. I mean, I wasn't not excited to see the other parts of the film, but I would have liked her to come back before that kind of reunion scene, I guess, with the Lancaster character, as they've sort of are in this long now affair where they're trying to hide it from everybody on this island.
Yeah. I mean, I actually, to speak to the accent, I thought she did a pretty good job of that. I mean, sometimes it's a little overpronounced at times, but like some of the hard R's are a little bit strong. But yeah, I was not necessarily like, I know her background and everything, but if I didn't, I don't know if I would necessarily catch on that she was not American. But as far as like the whole affair of everything, I feel like the way that she plays out the whole affair, it's like she's always kind of testing him to sort of make sure that he's the real deal. Like, she really enjoys to spar with him a little bit and sort of question whether he really does like her. And I feel like there's a defense mechanism there. And I think it's just to sort of prevent herself from getting hurt. And, you know, she probably was hurt a number of times in her past. And you see that she's just very watchful and just reading his body language. And even, like, you know, speaking to the transition point that he makes where he shifts the conversation on the beach to question her about his past, him about her past, you see everything in her body changes. It totally shifts in how she's now having to talk about this, even though she thought that she was in this very, like, ecstasy kind of moment with this guy. Now she has to, like, go back to reality. And it's a lot of really good, just like subtle acting that she manages to sort of shift things, the shift in her demeanor. And the whole monologue, I think it doesn't really come across as like a big, this is my big acting Oscar clip sort of thing. It feels like just a woman who doesn't want to be telling this story, but is being forced out of her in a way. And it feels more grounded and real to me than what another actress might give to a scene like that.
Absolutely. Yeah, no, that monologue, it doesn't feel like, oh, I'm performing a monologue. It just feels totally natural. Mm-hmm. And every single sort of element of the reveal just gets even worse and worse when you, like, it's so well visually described. Like, I totally can picture the experiences she's gone through because of how Kerr delivers the speech. Mm-hmm. And that's not something that a lot of actors who rely on a massive info dump monologue can do. Yeah. And that's, I guess, what sets Deborah Kerr apart.
Rhymes with star.
Kerr apart from a lot of other actresses at the time.
I agree. And yeah, I mean, she ultimately suggesting that he become an officer so that she can get divorced and marry Warden. I feel like I wasn't super clear on why that would be the case, but some sort of military thing. Not my forte. But eventually he just makes it clear that he doesn't want to be like a commissioned officer. He never really had any intention of doing that, and she's pretty mad about it. She feels like she had certain expectations for what this would be. And I like her sort of defiant moment where she's like, you can't just say you'll do a thing and then not do it. And it's just like this boiling point for it feels like a lot of her emotions have been beneath the surface. And now towards the end, it's like, okay, then this is also not gonna happen for me either. And she performs those final few scenes pretty well. It's unfortunate that the film just completely forgets about her for, you know, long sections of the film. Because in the beginning, yeah, it does, like you're saying, it feels like this is a story of her and Burt Lancaster and Montgomery Clift. It's these three leads, right? And then it just becomes completely invested, I think, in the Montgomery Clift, even Frank Sinatra stuff, and we lose the thread on Deborah. And it's unfortunate because I think it sort of lessens the impact of the performance because it doesn't feel like a full arc necessarily. It feels like we're missing a lot here too.
Yeah, and I mean, while I do criticize not having enough Deborah, I don't think that's a bad thing on the film. I think that the sections around Montgomery Clift and Frank Sinatra are just as compelling,
Sure.
and I would not want to have them included in the film. I mean, maybe if the film were a longer television adaptation. I know there was the 70s miniseries or the miniseries with Natalie Wood decades later, but maybe were it done in that sort of limited series way, we would get to see more scenes between the beach scene and the later scenes to make more sense and have more Deborah Kerr. But yeah, it's just, I guess, an unfortunate thing is that this role just isn't as important to the main narrative because she's the dejected wife. She's not one of the officers, which the film is obviously obsessed with because it's about these men in war.
Right.
So yeah, I mean, I totally understand why this resulted in a leading nomination for Deborah Kerr at the time. I mean, we all know that they were not going to put their new star in supporting actress, especially given she'd received a leading nomination 4 years prior.
Right.
They were not going to do that, no matter what the size of her role was.
Yeah, Deborah Kerr, I think this is a really good nomination, despite maybe being in the wrong category. Happy she was at least recognized for it.
Yeah. I mean, like, this is only the beginning of an incredible run for Deborah Kerr. I mean, lesser so of her nominated performances for me.
Yeah.
When I think about, especially of 1956 through 57 through 58, the performances she wasn't nominated for, I hope your guest can get into those because there's a lot of great work there.
Yes. And our friend Izzy from Be Kind Rewind had an excellent video on Deborah Kerr where she more or less said the same thing, which is that there's a lot of really good work that the Academy just didn't really recognize that are more interesting maybe than what she was recognized for.
Yeah. I think if there's 3 movies for Deborah Kerr that I think anyone who's really interested in seeing her at her best, those films have to be Black Narcissus, Teen Sympathy, and The Innocents.
Yep.
I think those are some incredible performances that will make you understand why many are upset that she never won, but can understand why she never won because of the roles she was nominated for.
Right, exactly. I would actually give a comparison here. I don't know if this has probably been done before, but it does kind of remind me of an Amy Adams type of situation where Amy Adams has a lot of really interesting, exciting roles like Enchanted and Arrival, and these performances that were ignored by the Academy in favor of some others like Vice. And it's just like, if you're looking back, or yeah, I would say that too. And if you're looking back like 50 years from now and you find that Amy Adams, this actress, never won an Oscar, but then you look at the nominations she got, and you're like, well, I mean, I don't know. Then you have to look at the full context of her career to see why people are similarly very upset that Amy Adams still hasn't won.
Yeah, so no, I know. Oh, I hate that we have to compare them, but I guess it makes sense. They're both redheads. Yeah. With 6 nominations so far for Amy Adams.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, and I mean, at least Amy Adams went supporting when she had supporting roles.
Yes, exactly.
Unlike Kerr, who even this year and even a later performance in the 50s in Bonjour Tristesse probably would have gone lead for that as well, even though that is for me a clear supporting performance. And that's another film I would recommend any person interested in seeing her at her best watch.
All right. Well, we have to move on to our final losing nominee. Maggie McNamara for The Moon is Blue. Oh boy. All right. So yes, the other losing nominee that fits into the kind of ingenue archetype, I would say, Maggie McNamara. And this is also continuing a trend of the past 2 years where we have actresses getting nominated for their film debut. 1952, it had Shirley Booth and Julie Harris. both of them having performed their roles on the stage. And then same goes for Maggie McNamara, who was in the stage production of The Moon is Blue. So I would say Maggie McNamara, probably the lowest profile actress that we've talked about on the show for quite some time, I would say. This was her first of only 5 films. And unlike Shirley Booth, who also only did 5 films, she didn't really get to have her legacy sort of cemented with an Oscar win. Although she does at least have this nomination. Can't take that away. So Maggie, she was a model as a teenager. She was in quite a few magazines, from what I understand, Vogue and Harper's Bazaar, and she was pretty big at the time. And then she became a stage performer. She'd done You Can't Take It With You, and then The Moon is Blue, where Otto Preminger actually directed her, and he directs her here in this adaptation. So the film, it's about an aspiring actress named Patty, played by Maggie, who is very chatty and very inquisitive about the world. And she meets this guy named Don, played by William Holden, at the Empire State Building. And he convinces her to go back to his apartment, and they have a dinner that becomes quite dysfunctional. She learns that his ex-fiancée, Cynthia, is living upstairs with her father, David, played by David Niven. And so Patty actually invites in David, and David becomes quite infatuated with her, and it's like this awkward 3-person dinner, and sort of becomes like a love triangle-ish. Hijinks ensue. There's a lot more going on, but maybe we'll touch on that. Yeah, so Maggie here, I had definitely had familiarity with her, at least, because I'd seen 3 Coins in the Fountain, which was the year after this. Not a big fan of that movie. I didn't really remember her that much from that movie, so this kind of just felt like a new actress to me watching this, as it definitely felt in 1953. So, thoughts on Maggie McNamara and this very odd movie? What do you think?
I too have seen 3 Coins in the Fountain and don't have the fondest of feelings towards it. She's not the woman I think about when I think of the main 3 in that film, even if I have to be forced to think about it, I guess. Such Maggie McNamara. I don't, in the words of Whitney Houston, I don't think of her. Mariah Carey. Sorry.
Yeah.
Sorry. This is such a puzzling nomination for me to try to figure out, both in terms of the actress's impact on the film industry and also the film and character she's featured in. I'm aware of the film's place in history and how it sort of helped in dismantling the Hays Code and the studio's kind of control. And I guess that's a good thing, but in seeing it through a 2022 lens, it's so tame and so non-controversial. The fact that this film caused controversy because this character out of nowhere says the words virgin, pregnant, and mistress is sort of laughable to me. Just because it's odd that she mentions them anyway, because they just are, but they almost come across as, oh, she's saying these words because they're saucy, but the way she delivers them is so nothing. She just says them blankly, and I struggle with this a lot. What are your feelings about it?
Yeah, another interesting one, because I think this is actually a prime example of the opposite of how I felt about Deborah Kerr's nomination. Because with Deborah, she makes a very memorable and a very distinct impression, despite having only 20 minutes of screen time in a 2-hour movie. And she just really elevates that part, and to such a level that I don't know if a lot of actresses could have done. And that's why, for me, that's an example of great acting, as opposed to great writing or great anything else, because it's her contributions that made the performance what it is. What I think we have here is kind of the opposite. I think, as written, I think the character of Patty is such a standout because, she has this very blunt and very honest way of conducting herself that is very disarming and has that sort of comedic effect because she has this kind of frank way of talking about things. And I think the character is more what got her the nomination, not so much what she brought to it as an actress. It's sort of like the discussion that I've had, you know, on other episodes where it's like, if you're in a biopic and you're playing a really interesting character and someone well-known and it's really showy stuff, you're almost like halfway there to a nomination already over other people, if that makes sense. And I think it's because the character here is so distinct, and an audience in 1953 wouldn't be expecting a sort of proper young woman to be speaking in this way, that it just naturally stood out. Because, yeah, otherwise, I don't think there's any real interiority with this character. It feels very robotic and detached from reality in a way where, like, the character feels like a construct more than a three-dimensional person. I would even say that William Holden and David Niven both have the opportunity to have more nuanced takes on their characters, and it feels like, and I've seen this from other reviews too, it feels very written by a man. And it's sort of projecting things onto this female character that at best feel kind of inaccurate and at worst are kind of reinforcing gender dynamics in a way that is very in keeping with the 50s, to be fair. But from our perspective is just kind of, what do I do with this?
Yeah, it seems like the writer wants to have it all with this character. He wants her to be both the kind of upright, respected woman who can cook, who can clean, but also at the same time being this sort of whore, you know, who talks about sex, who is just free and open, who's willing to kiss anyone who she comes in contact with. And you just can't have that if you don't have a performer who's gifted at acting, I guess, to make those sort of stereotypical ways of how film has presented women over time work.
Right.
It just kind of it's a conflict. You have these two types of female characters going head to head, and the end result is just nothing. Like, I don't know, the way you describe this character, I think of, I guess, a modern sort of similar character would be Jennifer Lawrence's Oscar-winning role in Silver Linings Playbook, where she's a woman unafraid to say what she wants to say, and you have Lawrence, who's a much more charismatic performer, who's able to sell that sort of difficult role to play. I'm sure you'll get into that in years' time when you get to that race.
Right.
But yeah, it's McNamara just brings nothing to this, and it's such a fast-paced script. A lot of the time, she's talking a mile a minute, and I don't remember anything she says because it just feels like McNamara is spewing out this dialogue, but not actually taking time to think about what she's saying.
Yeah.
It's such a dull turn, and I think a different actress, I'm trying to think of an ingenue from the time, I think maybe a young Elizabeth Taylor, were she playing this role, could have made it work. Early 1950s, other than Place in the Sun, aren't really the greatest point in Elizabeth Taylor's career, but maybe she could have made this role work. But as it stands, McNamara is just so boring and such a unfortunate nomination that I agree with you is nominated solely because of the character she's playing rather than the performance she's giving as the character.
Yeah. I mean, if you think about this character and her wants and needs on a basic level, like a basic character level, at least what she says she wants over the course of the film, I mean, I don't really know. She says she wants to be an actress, but then by her own admission, she's like, who am I kidding? If I found a husband, I would just settle down with him and just be a housewife. And she loves to cook. She says she wouldn't mind marrying an older man who has money. And there's really not much beyond that. It feels like some kind of Stepford Wives kind of fantasy. And she's playing that character in a way that feels like she's from Stepford Wives to me. Of course, the only difference is that she's blunt and it makes her like a quote-unquote funny type of character. But I feel like there's something in it that really feels dated. you know, like you could say that I'm maybe reading a lot into it, but I feel like the appeal of this character to these other guys is that she's direct and honest in a way that other women are indirect and more emotional. And that's kind of what makes this start to feel like a male fantasy kind of character. And there's just something about it where even if I don't dislike the film as much as other people do, it feels like it's framed in a way where it's like you're supposed to be quite impressed with Patty and how different she is from other women, but it doesn't really put in the work. And also Maggie doesn't really put in the work, to be honest, to give you a sense of who this person really is and like how she came to be this way. Like there's no revealing scene where she really talks about her past and how she gets to be like very vulnerable. I don't know. It's like, as much as I enjoy a little bit of the comedy of manners elements of the film and all the David Niven sort of mugging for the camera stuff, it just sort of strikes me as a kind of film where you could maybe enjoy it in the moment, but if you think about it for a little bit, it all kind of just falls apart.
Yeah, absolutely. There's just no sort of trajectory that makes sense for this character. It feels like things are just happening to her because of circumstance.
Right.
You know, even though the film is sort of obsessed with her frankness, it doesn't necessarily give her the lead. You know, the journey she goes through is affected by the people she runs into constantly, whether it's the Holden character, sort of make no sense to me. He instantly becomes obsessed with her, other than the fact that she's a young woman. You know, when he first meets her, she doesn't say a word. And that makes no sense to me. And then the Niven character falling for her is simply based on her frankness. It just, the way she goes through this film is by luck and circumstance. And I guess men at the time found this appealing because of how, I don't know, when I think of this character's confidence in comparison to Ava Gardner's confidence in Mogambo, it's so much different. It goes to show that if you cast well, I guess a poorly written script can make more sense. Right. Yet this film just doesn't, because you have McNamara in the role.
Exactly. Yeah, I don't know how you feel about Julie Harris in The Member of the Wedding, which we just talked about the previous year. But that's a performance where I kind of zoned out a little bit just because I found that performance to be rather monotone on the whole. You know, a very loud monotone, to be fair, but still very much keeping on the same level throughout a lot of that first hour. And it was very similar for me here, where she always had that very flat and almost like unaffected tone in her line readings that, you know, it can be funny in certain parts. Like when she says that he's, you know, maladjusted. I think like just her bluntness can be kind of fun at times, but other times I find myself kind of zoning out because it's just such a flat line. Like, I think a good example of that is when they go to his apartment and she goes around just like commenting on every single thing in the apartment and saying she doesn't like the Picasso painting, and she gets excited because he has a garbage disposal and how nice it would be to live in a house that has a garbage disposal. She's just going on and on and on. I don't know. Did you find it kind of hard to really engage with the film? Because that's kind of, I was sort of struggling even with some of her line readings that just felt like so samey.
Yeah, I really struggled. Again, this is the second shortest film, yet it felt almost as long as the other films, which are a half an hour longer. I just was waiting for it to end, and every time they introduce a new character into the fold, I think when it got to her father character sort of bursting his way on screen, I was like, is this film ever going to end?
Yes.
Like, how many more men am I going to have to experience in her life? Thankfully, we didn't have a big scene between her and her father that we saw, at least, because I feel like I would have just crashed and been like, what is the point?
Yeah.
Like, even she is so monotone in how she delivers everything, even in the later scene where she sort of is coming face to face with William Holden. I get no sort of change. It comes across as the exact same. That it's nothing. Like, I sort of am struggling for the words other than just saying no to this nomination. Actually, I love that you mentioned the Julie Harris. I find that performance okay, although I'm more so in that film watching Ethel Waters, who's just incredible.
Yeah, we talked about that. Yeah,
I can't
should have been Ethel Waters nominated
in lead.
Yeah. Well, I think the most real vulnerability we get from Maggie, I think, is at least somewhat approaching a humanizing moment where William Holden tells her that, you know, his ex-fiance called her a professional virgin, which sort of implies that I guess she's too forward in advertising her virtues, which can either be interpreted as just her trying too hard, or she's overcompensating for the fact that maybe she sleeps around, God forbid. So she definitely seems very hurt by that. And also when Don is kind of implying that she wishes that he wishes they never met, they at least give her something new there, but I don't think she does a lot with it because there's just not enough foundation there with this character to make me really feel anything for her, unfortunately. Like, I can definitely sympathize with the idea that all these men and, like, you know, David Niven's giving her $600 and saying no strings attached, but turns out there are strings attached. Like, you get that she's just like this young woman in a world full of these men who are trying to take advantage of her, like Lili. But it's just like she's not giving me enough to really feel like I'm supposed to care about what she's gone through, if that makes sense. Like, I get it on the surface, but just not from what she's giving from it.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, you don't want her to be subjected to the cruel acts, but you don't feel sympathetic for her because you're not given much of a range of emotion to this character other than comments about everything. You don't sort of get an inner emotional state. You get really any insecurities. Like, at least I don't. And I guess that can be an exciting character to play, but McNamara just doesn't provide any sort of range. I mean, she doesn't have the range to play this role. And that is the main problem is, I mean, God forbid having to witness this performance on stage. I don't know how anyone stayed in their seat.
Yeah. I don't know. Maybe it works better on the stage. I don't feel like it was adapted very well to film as just a film itself, because it's extremely stagey and it's quite slow paced. To go back to what you were saying before about how it felt like longer just watching it. Not the best film, but I think it has its moments. I think it can be funny in moments. I like some of the madcap energy at times, but yeah, when I look too hard at it, I don't really love what I see. So yeah, and this will be the only time that we talk about Maggie McNamara. Like I said, she only did 4 other movies after this. I did read that she had a pretty hard life and she dealt with mental illness, which sort of led to her death, and she was only 49. So it was a tough business for her. I don't think Hollywood was really for her. So yeah, kind of a tragic ending, but at least she gets this nomination out of it, however we may feel about it, you know?
Yeah, I guess the struggle with Maggie McNamara is, especially when you look at her co-nominees in this lineup, she has such a similar look to Audrey Hepburn and Leslie Caron, and even Gene Simmons, who in 1953 was everywhere. Mm-hmm. Like these kind of, I guess, short-haired brunette. I guess the 50s was short hair and brunette, and then you had the blonde bombshell, and those were the only types of female characters people were allowed to play. Yeah. But yeah, I was actually reading an article about kind of comparing Audrey and Maggie and how sort of their careers. I didn't read the full thing. It was sort of an interesting thing to look at how their 2 careers sort of went, and I guess a lot of Maggie's career has to do with maybe the controversy around this character, and how sort of talked about it was at the time, and even the films she made immediately after it, as opposed to Audrey, who, I mean, you'll talk about her next year with Sabrina. Like, the immediate follow up to her Oscar win is another instant classic. So
right.
it's sort of an interesting comparison when you look at these two actresses side by side.
Let's get into it. Audrey Hepburn for Roman Holiday. So this is our big introduction here to another major force that we'll be talking about many times on this show over the next, I don't know, year or so, I would say. So obviously Audrey Hepburn is an icon, cinematic icon, fashion icon, Oscar winner, EGOT winner, I should say, you know, humanitarian. She's a lot of different things to a lot of different people. And yeah, I mean, I think it's important to note that she was more than just, you know, the pretty, fashionable young woman that she sort of become immortalized through Breakfast at Tiffany's, like that look. And I think sometimes she's sort of thought of, or at least just written about, in ways that I don't think are entirely fair, because I know some people think of her as more of a movie star than an actress, but I'd like to think that maybe over the course of this series, at least from my vantage point, we can explore how she was, I think, a very gifted actress. But yeah, just to give some more insight into her and this performance that and what led up to this. She grew up during World War II. She was born in Belgium, studied in the Netherlands, and she had a first-hand look at some of the atrocities of what went down. And so she kind of had a hard life in that regard. And she eventually went into dancing, ballet. She started doing stage work. And then eventually she was in the Broadway production of Gigi, to bring it back to Gigi, which, so she went to Hollywood and took on some smaller roles, but then Roman Holiday was sort of packaged as the big introduction to Hollywood. Even the credits say introducing Audrey Hepburn, even though she'd been in stuff before. So yeah, let's get to it. You know, she really took the world by storm with this performance, and it was really off to the races from there. She's playing Princess Anne, who's visiting Rome, and she's sick of her royal duties, and she decides to run off and just have some adventures in the city. And she disguises herself by cutting off some of her hair, and she meets this guy, Joe, played by Gregory Peck, who is a newspaper reporter who doesn't really recognize her at first. And he invites her back to his place, doesn't actually sleep with her, but allows her to sleep there. And eventually in the morning, he realizes who this person is. She's the princess, and arranges for this sort of thing where he can maybe do a one-on-one interview with her for like $5,000. And so for the rest of the film, it's largely about Joe pretending that Princess Anne is just a regular woman, and that's just them having adventures together. And with Anne, it's like she's pretending that she's, you know, just a regular young woman. And yeah, I guess I would classify this as like a brief encounter type of dynamic in a way. So yeah, let's talk Audrey. You know, I'm sure you have a take on Audrey Hepburn, being as big of a film fan as you are. What are your thoughts on this and her big breakout performance here?
My take on Audrey Hepburn is I love her. You know, she definitely is one of the first movie stars that I fell in love with when visiting classic cinema. I mean, it's not that difficult for her not to be one of your first ones. She's so much iconography. She's such a face that you know and a figure that you know. And in watching Roman Holiday, it's such a pleasant watch. You know, she really gets to show why she's one of the most charismatic screen performers. I really love her, and that's, I guess, my take, is that I love her as a screen actor, and I'm very excited for your series to hopefully sort of banish any negative feelings towards her Academy Award nominations, because honestly, when I look at them, there's not necessarily one that you can really negatively discuss. I mean, thankfully she didn't receive one in 1964, but that's another
okay. Well, more on that later.
Yes. Yeah. But no, I really enjoy this performance, and it's such a great, not debut, but breakout for her. And I mean, any actress would be thankful for a breakout like this. This is such a compelling role to play, but I think a lot of the greatness of the role has to do with how Audrey plays it.
Absolutely. So, I mean, as you might have been able to tell from my introduction, huge fan of Audrey Hepburn. She just had that very special kind of X factor that is just kind of impossible to teach. And obviously, on the surface, you could say it's her gracefulness and even her smile, the way that the camera just finds her in just the right light. Like, that's all part of it, obviously. But what I really find with a lot of her performances is just kind of a playfulness and this feeling of just kind of an effortlessness that is quite refreshing, I would say. And, you know, it's ironic that she would be known for playing these more elegant, refined kinds of roles, because I find her to be actually very grounded and natural and organic as a performer, you know? And for me, there's just not a lot of affectation when it comes to Audrey. It doesn't feel forced. And I think she has a way of kind of underplaying a lot of roles while still delivering on just whatever natural charm she has to bring a character to life. And I think that's exactly what she does here. You know, this character is the kind of person that maybe you're not naturally inclined to feel sympathy for. You know, she lives a privileged life. She's beautiful. She's sheltered. But I find that it never really goes in the direction of her being over the top in just how much she hates her position in life. It's like this delicate balance that she finds in the beginning. And obviously William Wyler is a credit to him too, and how they're able to really craft this princess character into someone worth caring about and wanting to see her escape from her confinements. And I think a lot of it is just in her expressions and her looking just so longingly out a window. Even, you know, she laughs a little too hard in the beginning about the idea of like people who sleep with nothing on at all. Just like these little immature kind of moments that show her to be sheltered, and yet she also has like a warmth to her where, you know, I don't know if the original plan to cast either Elizabeth Taylor or Gene Simmons in the role would have worked as well. What do you think?
Yeah, I like how you described her acting style, especially in the early 50s, where there was such a conflict of, you had method sort of being introduced in 1951 with Streetcar and the more histrionic style of acting from decades prior. Audrey even goes a level further and is like a different and naturalistic, like very much her own style of performing, and it's so effective. It just feels like she's living the role, and the camera just happens to be there to capture her very natural reactions to everything. I mean, I understand that the film is scripted, but so many of her moments feel so unscripted and by chance that Wyler has captured her greatness.
Yeah.
I guess to speak about the possible other castings, I think Gene Simmons is a performer who I love, and while more stagey than Hepburn, could have maybe delivered this role effectively. You never know. That's just alternative history, I guess. But definitely Elizabeth Taylor would not have been a good casting choice for this. She's a bit, now that she'd sort of aged out of her young age in the 40s, she playing these more immature characters just didn't really fit with her.
Right.
And I think Hepburn, especially, unlike say Leslie Caron, who's playing a sort of similar immature character, I never feel that she's totally unaware of her surroundings, and she's really compelling, and you can see her sort of a character there. And whether that's the script of Roman Holiday being much, much stronger than Lili is, I think that's just Hepburn being the sort of more stronger screen performer than Caron is.
Yeah, it speaks to sort of what some directors do, where they cast people who haven't acted very much before, if at all, and there's just kind of that raw energy that they have that doesn't feel trained or tested before, like, and that's something that can be harnessed very well by certain directors. And I think even though Audrey had done performances before, technically, this sort of feels like that. Like, she's not trained necessarily like maybe a Gene Simmons would be. So that's part of what I think makes this character feel in that way, that effortless feeling, like you're just sort of capturing Audrey Hepburn running around Rome with Gregory Peck in a way.
Yeah.
But I think even like before they get on their little adventures, just like when she's in her, I almost wanted to say it's like drunk acting, but she's not drunk. She's like, she has a sedative. So it's like altered state kind of acting where she's slurring her words and she's like reciting a poem for him. And she's kind of like taking on this scholarly tone in a way that's quite charming. And you can see why like he would be taken with her just in how sort of loopy and weird she is. And they go back to his place, like I said, and asks if he can help her undress. And she's just got some like really good comedic timing and that kind of unaffected tone that suits this character, you know, and the fact that she's in this like altered state, it sort of exacerbates the tone. And I just think she has a lot of control over her physicality too, that definitely reflects her background, you know, as a dancer, which lends itself to this being a person who has been trained to be prim and proper, but is also able to kind of loosen up when she needs to.
Yeah, absolutely. There's nothing very stale or stoic about how she moves throughout the film. Right. You know, she is just so natural and just comes across as a real person. And that's not an easy thing to do in film. But Hepburn always succeeds in that realm of making these characters her own and making them feel like almost like you're watching a documentary. Like that's how just natural she is with her gestures, and she somehow manages to make drunken like a very could be over the top way of playing drunk or playing sort of inebriated very effective and not over the top. It just feels, it makes sense for this character.
Right. And I feel like that's very rare for a young performer who hasn't done much before to really understand fully exactly what the scene needs, what the arc needs. I mean, I don't think there's a whole lot to talk about acting wise when it comes to like their adventures in Rome and all of that, other than just how we see her just excitement and that very winning smile that shows just how happy she is to be just free of all these responsibilities. We obviously have that iconic Vespa scooter scene where she's just taking charge. That's very fun. The scene where she's like placing her hand in the mouth of truth. I mean, even when she's like getting her hair cut and she plays it like she's suddenly transformed into this other person and she's so much lighter now, like literally letting go of all that baggage. I mean, it sounds pretty simple, obviously, but I feel like she really also incorporates that into the performance after that, just that feeling of lightness and just like the freedom there. I really think, though, that the better parts of the film are just when we're zoomed in on her face and she's just sort of silently taking in her environment, like when she's looking in the mirror during her whole haircut scene, you know, or like when they're dancing later on when it's at night. And I feel like you see just from the look on her face where she's almost like emotional and kind of moved by this whole experience and what it means for her and how she feels like she's growing feelings for this guy. And yeah, it just brings me back to the idea of how this would play in the hands of another actress, or even if Gregory Peck wasn't in the lead, because I think he's really good here too. This could have been pretty corny and kind of like hokey material, I think, but both of them just say so much just in their faces. These little micro expressions that show the complexity of what they're going through and what this experience means to them, even knowing that it's not going to last forever. So it's like we have to enjoy it for what it is right now. I think they both really complement each other so well.
Yeah, I think what especially makes their chemistry work really well together is how both characters are hiding something from each other.
Right.
And it's not like, obviously he is aware that she's the princess, and that sort of can be a bit more of a larger thing that he's holding on to. But the fact that she's also hiding that she's the princess, I think makes them work even better together, because they're in it together. It's not someone more in control than the other. I think the fact that she just runs loose and is it's just such an equal match, and I think that's what makes the film work even stronger. If he was more sort of controlling of things that she was doing, it wouldn't work as well. And I like that you mentioned how the film really zooms in on her expression and how like expressive her whole face is. I mean, that mirror scene as she's getting her hair cut, I totally related to the like, she basically says nothing to this hairstylist and he just knows that she's not enjoying it. And that just goes to show how effective a face actor she is, and how, I mean, the history of Audrey Hepburn, knowing, like, having seen the sort of audition reel of how she became famous in film, and knowing that just zooms in on her face, it makes sense why in her breakout role they would choose to use that great addition to her acting that she possesses.
Oh yeah, they definitely knew what they had with her. And I've always loved the end of this film, when it really is like that brief encounter type of conclusion for these two people who seem almost like not necessarily soulmates, but they just had such a beautiful connection together and they fit together so well. And yet they do have these separate lives. It was never really going to work out between the two of them. And I think it's just another case of the two of them really just, they're both able to express so many different feelings without saying much of anything. Like when she's back at the embassy and he's there and he's the reporter, and neither of them are going to like publicly acknowledge. They're not going to have like this big like, oh, of course kind of moment. They just share like a knowing look with each other. And yeah, it's just like that silent exchange of how like you could tell both of them are going to remember this for the rest of their lives. You know, this one day in Rome, even if they're not together, they'll always sort of have that. And, you know, I mean, if the movie doesn't really work for you, then all of what I'm saying here is kind of just corny, and it's just me getting swept up in my own emotional response to the film. But I think it's just because the two of them really sell this connection that they have. Yes, there's parts of it that are romantic, obviously, but it just feels like two people connecting on like a soul level for this brief moment. And that's why I just love both of their performances. It's effortless. Like we've been saying, it just fits them like a glove.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think of in those final moments when she sees him in the press conference and realizes this whole time that he was a member of the press,
mm-hmm.
and the fact that she doesn't react in a way negatively towards him, and she realizes how he allowed her to be free for this one day, and how he allowed her to just not be expected to act in a certain way. She just delivers that moment wonderfully. And it's just goes to show how effective a screen performer she is, that she's such a great mover in film, that no matter the time in history, I think she would have been just as a successful silent performer as she is in these years since the silent era.
Yeah, I completely agree, and that's probably why she's endured in the way that she has, and more so than any of these other actresses that we've talked about. Some of them are definitely, they have iconic moments in film in their own ways, but Audrey it makes sense that she's the one that's really survived the most and had this almost universal type of recognition all these years later. So let's get into why Audrey Hepburn is our big winner here. I feel like the sense that I got just from researching is that it was more or less a foregone conclusion that Audrey would win.
Yeah, she dominated I guess at the time precursors weren't as important as they are now, but the fact that she won...
They didn't hurt, you know.
No, the fact that she won the New York Film Critics Prize, the Golden Globe, the BAFTA, basically... She won everything that was necessary to win prior to this win. And even when you look at the success of the films in that year's race, she's in the much more widely appealing film. Well, I guess other than From Here to Eternity, but that's a different situation.
Right,
This film
right.
is all about Audrey Hepburn, whereas Carr is dealing with a lot more ensemble members in that film, whereas Roman Holiday it's from the perspective of Princess Anne, and when you leave the film, she's one of the first things that you think about, and that's how I guess she really dominated the awards prizes that year, and it makes sense why she won.
Yeah, it's a perfect kind of Cinderella story that Hollywood is always kind of obsessed with, especially in Best Actress. They don't care about it so much in Best Actor, as I've discovered, but they really love a young woman having a Star is Born kind of moment, and this is a perfect example of that. Even though we also have, obviously, Leslie Caron and Maggie McNamara, I think in comparison, it's like, obviously, Audrey just has so much charisma, and you know, she made headlines just from whatever she was doing. Like she was becoming a star, and it was just her time, quote unquote, even though this was her first time to be really recognized. It all just came together. I mean, the only other nominee here that actually won an award before this was Leslie Caron. She won the BAFTA for Best Foreign Actress. So that's something that existed at one time. But I also think that Paramount, the studio behind Roman Holiday, was also very invested in Audrey winning this, because they had already signed her to Sabrina the year after, and they kind of wanted to advertise that they had an Oscar winner in the lead. That's literally from Inside Oscar, that they wanted to promote it in that fashion, and they got what they wanted. And I'm sure they put enough resources behind it that she probably handily won the vote, I would guess. I don't think this was a close race.
No, I don't think so as well. I mean, it's so great that Audrey Hepburn had this very great moment at the start of her career and still managed to continue on and almost do better after this moment. I mean, the fact that she's one of the rare people to EGOT is a success in itself, and I don't think you could imagine that an ingenue in this great role would go on to do the amazing and brilliant things that she would do throughout her life and career.
Yeah. I mean, she really made good on the promise of this first Oscar win, for sure. So shall we get into some questions?
Yeah,
Twitter?
let's.
All right. We got quite a few here. From our friend, Baby Clyde. Top 3 worst Best Actress lineup ever, right? What do you think, Owen? Is this a top 3 worst in 94 years?
Maybe not top 3, but top 5 for sure. I think there's at least 4 lineups that I consider worse. It's definitely, like, even rewatching them now, no matter how strong Audrey, Deborah, and Ava Gardner are, just the combination of Leslie Caron and Maggie McNamara really drives the strength of the competition. Yeah, really a lot. I mean, it's not as bad as, for me, 2011 or even 1935. I think those are weaker years for sure, but it's definitely not one of the greatest lineups ever assembled.
Yeah. I don't feel comfortable saying right now that it's top 3 worst, because I still haven't seen every single Best Actress nominee yet. But I do think that it's definitely on the weaker end, especially compared to even a lot of the lineups that I've talked about lately, where, 49, well, not 49, but 50 to 52, I'd say, has some really, really solid contenders there. And here I feel like there's like 3 if we're being nice. So.
You've just come from one of the greatest lineups ever in 3 years, exactly. In 1950, and then even 1951, which is a very underrated lineup.
Yeah.
And even the next year, you're going to go into
God.
This so much incredible work, yet this year just sort of sticks out for the weaknesses, especially.
Exactly. James Byrne said, was Audrey's win for her beguiling charm and A Star is Born screen presence, or for her performance?
I think it's possible that it's for both. I think it is a great performance, but obviously the Star is Born narrative, I'm sure, had a lot to do with it. But there's thankfully, unlike a lot of Star is Born moments, it's actually a compelling performance and not just about her being this new discovery.
I agree. I think it's both. And I think they can coexist, I would say. They don't have to be mutually exclusive.
Yeah.
Fritz said, why did Audrey win the Drama Globe and not comedy? A fair question.
It's definitely not a drama. Like, it's...
I think it becomes more dramatic by the end, technically, but yeah, I would definitely classify it as comedy.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I could see just how kind of separated they become by the end and how upsetting it sort of is. I think the majority of the film is quite light, and that's not a bad thing. I think we need comedic turns just as much as we need these grand, damn dramatic turns. So, yeah, it doesn't... I guess they maybe awarded her in drama because they thought of it as the more respectable category to award her in.
Yeah.
And, I mean, I guess I'm not too upset of it because Ethel Merman is a Golden Globe winner because of Audrey Hepburn's competing in drama. And I like that world we live in.
Yes, exactly. Another one from Fritz. Could Leslie and Audrey have switched roles?
Well, I guess because they sort of have a similar screen persona, yes. But do I think Leslie could have shined in the way that Audrey did? Absolutely not. And do I want Audrey Hepburn to be subjected to starring in Lili? Also absolutely not. So I think history has given us the right castings.
Yeah, I'm going to go a hard no on that question, but I do think, Audrey could have done Lili, I think she could have pulled it off maybe even better than Leslie Caron, possibly, but again, yes, don't want to subject her to it. Don't think Leslie Caron would have been a good Princess Anne. That's a hard pass for me.
Mm-hmm.
But let's move on to a similar question from Sue Ellen Rossi. With doppelgangers Audrey, Leslie, and Maggie all breaking out in 1953, there was definitely a look that people of that time were into. Any thoughts on why that particular type was popular at that time? Parentheses, kind of pixie, dark-haired girl next door, hint of bohemian.
Yeah, I mean, I sort of said it earlier in how the 1950s was very much sort of obsessed with two types of women. The pixie cut brunette or the blonde bombshell. It was just sort of an easy type of character to write for. And I mean, thankfully, a lot of the actresses who kind of had these characteristics to their look were quite compelling with, say, Audrey Hepburn and Marilyn Monroe. It doesn't make me necessarily hate the stereotype as much because the performers found ways to kind of make me sympathize with them and enjoy their work. So I guess it sort of makes sense just with the 1950s were such a time for the film industry creating these types of women and only allowing women to play these certain types that it makes sense why you have three nominees who sort of have a similar look about them.
Yeah, I don't know. I'm just speculating here. It does strike me as a very 1950s like conformity kind of lineup, just culturally speaking, and the sort of casual sexism that comes with that. And I think the last few lineups that I've talked about have felt like much more complex types of characters, darker kinds of roles, women of different generations even. And this feels like we're kind of done with that now, and now we're only interested in women as love interests. Because every single one of these performances has that component to it that's important. So
no, the 1950s is when you look at all of the Best Actress winners together, it's such a odd group of women.
Mm-hmm.
You have your ingenues like Audrey and Grace, and then you have your 50-year-old women like Shirley Booth, the only 50-year-old women to win until Julianne Moore would win like 60 years later.
Right.
And it's such an odd group of women together. It's probably one of my... I enjoy the list of winners in this decade together. While not all my choices, it's not as bad as I think the decade prior or even the Well, there are bad decades. I'd have to look at them all. It's too much research to do at the moment.
Right. Julian Bonzu, we already kind of answered this question. That was just about Liz Taylor and Gene Simmons in the part of Princess Anne and how we think they would have done. And actually, the question is, do we think they could have gone on to win the Oscar if they were in the role?
Again, that's sort of alternative history where I just don't. I mean, Elizabeth Taylor, this wouldn't have been a breakout for her. You know, she'd been a child star. She'd done A Place in the Sun, so there's not that sort of exciting newcomerness to her.
Right.
And Gene Simmons was already an Academy Award nominee, so again, there's not that sort of breakoutness, and neither actress sort of has the same screen charisma as Audrey Hepburn. That's not to say they're bad actresses, because they're not. They're just different types.
Right.
But yeah, I don't think either of them would have won were they in this role, just because they don't have the same sort of narrative, I guess, that Audrey Hepburn does, and also they wouldn't have played the role in a similar way at all.
Agreed. Yeah, I think the discovery of Audrey Hepburn was a big part of the story there. So Fritz said, what drugs did people take back then to treat Lili as a serious movie? Apparently some pretty hardcore drugs.
Yeah, a lot of bleach, I'd say, you know, clean their households.
There you go.
Post-war, maybe the men in war suffered from serving from bombs and nuclear bombs and sort of stuff like that. Maybe that's why they thought of it as a great movie.
There you
go. You know, postpartum depression of women, PTSD of the men, all this sort of things. Okay. Maybe that's I'm just trying to come up with anything that could explain why Lili was this amazing film.
So generally just mental afflictions are the reason why. Okay.
Well, maybe they were related to the mental affliction that the Lili character sort of presented as having.
That makes sense. Yeah, there you go. Maybe we just solved it there. Miles McHale said, Leslie Caron, did we just nominate her because she's adorably French? I love these loaded questions.
I mean, I guess they didn't nominate her for her previous major film where she was adorably French, so I guess...
Yeah, in Paris.
Exactly. Yeah, and they never nominated her for... Her next nomination wasn't for a French role either. I mean, they did nominate for Gigi, where she was French in Paris and adorable. Yeah. So I guess no is the answer to that question.
Yeah, I don't know. I guess not. But I'm sure it was a difficult part to pull off, so I don't want to say it was just because of that, like, you know, but as a general pattern, certainly fits in with, they're really just taken by these ingenues. Let's just say that. César Award winner Baby Annette says, Mogambo, who, what, when, where, and why? I take it our favorite baby is not a fan of Mogambo.
Okay, I will try attempt to answer this question. Mogambo, who? Ava Gardner. Why? Ava Gardner. Where? The elephants. When? Ava Gardner. That is my answer to that question. If I've forgotten any, I apologize.
I think you forgot what.
Oh, what?
What is Mogambo? Here's that question. What does Mogambo mean?
Mogambo for me, it means that.
For you, yes.
Mogambo is the unanswerable question of our times.
Yeah. It is. It is the alpha and the omega. Yeah. It's never said in the course of the film. I did read that apparently it might be a reference to some sort of nightclub that was in Los Angeles, Mogambo, and they just called it Mogambo because they thought it sounded Swahili. True story.
Okay.
Yep.
All right.
So make of that what you will. Sam Meltzer said, if Mogambo was a genuinely great film, people would consider Gardner's performance an all-timer and constantly complain that she didn't win. Agree or disagree?
I mean, I guess agree, because it's a really good performance. We'll get into our final opinions on it sooner rather than later, but Yes.
Yeah. I don't think it's an all-timer necessarily, so I'll disagree on that, but certainly had the potential to be seen in a better light if the film was better, sure. I think that's always the case, even now, like certain biopics that are preferred these days, like Natalie Portman and Jackie, for example, tend to have better received feelings to them than some others that aren't as well received, like a Jessica Chastain in Eyes of Tammy Faye, because the movie isn't as good. I think we've always sort of been in that situation where sometimes it's hard to separate the performance from the film.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I mean, I guess the greatness of Gardner's performance has a lot to do with her being the best part of the movie. So if the film was better, would her performance be seen as lesser than because it's a saving grace of the film as it currently stands?
Right. James Byrne said, was this Deborah Kerr's best shot at winning a Best Actress Oscar? I don't want to say anything on that right now, because I'll answer that when we get to our final Deborah Kerr performance that we talk about. But and I also don't want to spoil whether she might be the runner-up here, so I'll just plead the fifth on that one.
I mean, I don't want to spoil my thoughts on this category, but I will say, having seen all her nominations, and since I won't be returning to discuss any more of her nominations,
you might. Who knows?
Who knows? Well, I would gladly return, but just with the not knowing, I would say no. I don't think it's her the nomination that she stood the most chance to win, and that's all I'm going to say.
Fair enough. Both Fritz and Andrew Carden asked the same question, which is that if Deborah Kerr was in supporting, what would have happened? Would she have won?
It's a hard question to answer, because would major motion industries want to award leading actress Deborah Kerr with a supporting trophy to represent her career? Probably not.
Right.
But with her nomination happening in supporting, she definitely is atop the list of the supporting choices for me that year. But even still, I think my choice of the nominees would be still Thelma Ritter for Pick Up on South Street. But I definitely do think, if both women were nominated supporting for From Here to Eternity, I think that Deborah Kerr would outdo Donna Reed and get awarded.
Yes, I am going to say I think she would have won. Even with Donna Reed also in that category, I don't think there would have been a vote split, quote unquote. I think they would have all gone for Deborah. So that's the unfortunate scenario here, where she is a leading lady, but she would have gotten a supporting Oscar. At least she would have had an Oscar.
Yeah, so and I personally don't see them as lesser than, so
right.
Supporting performances are just as important as leading. The people who view a supporting trophy as lesser than for these movie stars is annoying to me, because you can't have a film with just leads. You have, like, I guess you can't have a film with just one actor, but like if every film had just one actor, that would be boring.
Yes, fair enough. This is from Chelsea. Two of my favorite hot girls, Audrey in her first major leading role and Kerr in her Hall of Fame hot girl beach makeout. What contemporary hot girl roles would you cast them in today?
Oh my God, question. Okay.
I did write some possibilities down here. I don't know if you saw this question.
If you want to go with yours, and I'll look at the recent Best Actress nominees and try suit them into those roles.
Okay. Well, for Deborah Kerr, I went with Amy Dunn in Gone Girl. I just feel like that would be a trip to just watch her, because I think she could definitely pull off the deceptive side there really well, and the darkness underneath that role. So that's what I would say for Deborah Kerr. Do you have another option?
Oh, I mean, for hot girl, like, I can think of an actress nominee that I'd like her to play a role, but it's not necessarily about her hotness. So I feel like I'm not doing Chelsea's question justice, and I don't want to do that to you, Chelsea, because I love you. I guess a role I'd like to see Deborah Kerr play is maybe Charlize Theron in Young Adult.
Oh wow, I love it.
It's not like anything she's ever gotten the opportunity to play, but I sort of want Deborah Kerr to tell me to I basically just want Deborah Kerr to deliver that great scene where she gets the like drink poured on her and just tells everyone to fuck off.
Yes. That would be very fun. I would love that. Wow. So for Audrey, I mean, this is kind of lazy because Rooney Mara is going to play Audrey in a biopic, but I did think of Audrey Hepburn as Therese Belivet in Carol as a possibility. Could see it
Yeah,
happen.
I could imagine a Hepburn duo in a Carol from the 50s.
Oh my
with
God,
maybe
Catherine and Audrey.
I mean, it links up with Kate and Rooney and Audrey and Catherine and
It does. Yeah, I love it.
Yeah, but I guess a hot role I'd like to see Audrey Hepburn play nowadays is maybe. Oh, this is difficult.
I do have another option, by the way.
Go ahead.
The other one that I thought of is as Nina in Black Swan.
That would
I
be
think
really
that would be
good.
incredible.
I could imagine Gene Simmons playing the Mila Kunis role.
Oh my God. I love it already.
Yeah, definitely not Maggie McNamara. Maggie McNamara can just be gone.
Yes, definitely.
Yeah, I guess to answer the question, maybe Audrey Hepburn in Marriage Story? I don't know if that's necessarily about her being hot, but I guess I would like to see her. I don't know. This is a difficult question to answer. Maybe something like The Favorite. Oh no. Maybe Rachel Weisz The Favorite.
Oh wow.
Or Emma Stone probably would make more sense.
Yes. Wow. I want to see all of these things now. Damn it. All right. What other questions we got here? Fritz said you also watched 2 supporting actress nominees. Who do you prefer? Donna Reed or Grace Kelly?
Well, we sort of, both of us don't have that strong feelings for either one of them.
Yeah.
So
for me, it's actually Donna Reed between the two of them. Because I have the least problems with it.
Yeah, me too. I think Donna Reed has one effective scene. I think her final scene where she's pleading with Cliff not to go is well delivered, as opposed to Grace Kelly, who just doesn't have any redeeming acting scenes for me in Mogambo.
I would agree. Another one from Fritz. Which younger actor would you have cast in Mogambo instead of Gable? I love the shade of this question because I do agree that Clark Gable is too old for this role.
Yeah, I guess the person that I maybe went with was, I looked at the best actor list from this year, and I guess I would like to see maybe Burt Lancaster or Montgomery Clift.
Ooh.
In that role. I don't know. I think Clift is capable of playing anything, so it would be an interesting role for him to play. And then Lancaster just sort of has that natural sexual charisma on screen, and I guess that's a major part of that role.
Right. Yeah, that's a good call. I thought of someone who's not really like a great person necessarily, but I think would probably be good in the role, which is Kirk Douglas. Just because, he has like the roguish charm to him. I also think of his son, Michael Douglas, in Romancing the Stone. Like that kind of vibe, I think would work.
Yeah. He also was one I considered as well.
Yeah. Ayrton O'Brien said, "Is the moon blue enough?" A very existential question.
Yeah. Actually, while we're discussing Moon is Blue again, I find it sort of an interesting note how there was a German adaptation of the play the same year.
Yeah.
Also directed by Otto Preminger. I've not seen that.
Yeah. There's a whole story behind it where they filmed it at not the exact same time, but they filmed it consecutively because they just wanted to do that for English and German using the same sets.
Yeah, it sort of reminds me of the Anna Christie, the Greta Garbo film. Yeah, but obviously it was the same star in both versions, unlike the German version where she did.
Yes. Miles McHale said, "Why do you think a juggernaut like From Here to Eternity missed in the lead performances but swept supporting? It was even a double Best Actor nominee."
I mean, like when I think of in lead actor, the choice is pretty clear for me that Montgomery Clift should have won for From Here to Eternity. Like watching it again, he's incredible. That scene of him playing the bugle after the death of Frank Sinatra is heartbreaking.
Yes.
And so emotional, and unlike anything that male actors were allowed to play at the time.
Yep.
And yet he still had that male sort of security while also being very emotional, and not many actors are capable of doing that. But I guess William Holden was sort of due, having not won for Sunset Boulevard, and Stalag 17 was a popular film as well. Yeah. And then I guess actress Audrey Hepburn just makes sense as the winner, so that's why Carr didn't win. And I guess in supporting, when you look at the other nominees, it makes sense why they went for From Here to Eternity actors, especially Frank Sinatra, who is incredible,
right,
in his role. Donna Reed is a questionable one for me, but I guess makes sense since her film is the most watched of those films.
Yeah, I just think narratives for William Holden and Audrey Hepburn were too big to surpass for anyone else. Just to get to a handful of snubs here, Eric Maxwell Brunn said, "Why do you think Marilyn Monroe or Jane Russell missed for Gentlemen Prefer Blondes? Or did the Academy get it right?" I don't think the Academy got it right. I would have nominated both of them. I love that film, and I love the both of them together.
Yeah, me too. I love that film as well. It's my favorite film of 1953. I think it's an incredible film. Mm-hmm. And when I guested with Gabe Guarin on his alternative Oscar podcast about 1953 in particular, and both of those women were in my own personal category.
Yeah.
So I guess why they didn't get nominated is maybe it was seen as too frivolous, and sort of these women use sex but succeed and get what they want because of how they use sex. And I don't think men at the time were willing to award female characters like this. I mean, they should have, because they're incredible, but I guess that's an explanation why neither of them were nominated.
Yep. I think that's a very, very sadly good point there. You know, they were in a film that they just didn't take seriously. I would gladly slot them in over Leslie Caron and Maggie McNamara, though. So
I would gladly put them in over any single nominee in this category.
There you go.
Even the ones I enjoy.
Yeah. Steve, no, not that Steve, the other one, said, did Gene Simmons having 3 films out that year, The Robe, The Actress, and Young Bess, hurt her chances? Which one should she have been nominated for if she had been nominated?
Oh, see, I love Gene Simmons, and I do think the fact she had so many films out that year caused confusion about which one to go for. I mean, The Robe is not the role to go for, so that immediately goes.
No. Even though it's the Best Picture nominee, it's not there, right? It's not the role. Yeah.
Exactly. And Angel Face was too film noir for them to go for. I guess Young Bess makes the most sense as the film to nominate her for. Mm-hmm. But I just think there were too many options, and there was no way to nail on one. I mean, the fact that she won the National Board of Review for all 3 of her major films that year makes sense why she wasn't nominated, because there was no way you could make a choice and be satisfied with that.
Yeah. The other question he had was, should Gloria Graham have been in the hunt for the big heat?
Yes, but I would award her in supporting for the big heat. I could understand she is very borderline, but she's my overall winner in 1953 for supporting actress. Yeah. And a much better choice than her actual supporting actress win the year prior.
For The Bad and the Beautiful, yeah.
Yeah.
Not a great win. But yeah, great femme fatale role for her. Definitely one of my favorite film noirs. I would have been very happy to see her in either category, I'll say. And then last one from Fritz, which tees up our last segment. If Audrey had made her debut 1 year later, what would have happened in this category this year? I feel like this maybe tips our hand about who we think the runner-up was, but if you think there was another person who could have been nominated that actually could have won over the rest of these nominees if Audrey wasn't there, have at it. I can't really think of anyone that would have, but what do you think?
I mean, trying to imagine Audrey Hepburn having both Roman Holiday and Sabrina in 1954 is like too much to think about.
That's a lot.
Like, especially when you compare that to Grace Kelly and the 1954 that she had.
Oh my God. Yeah. It's too much.
I mean, maybe the Battle of the Ingenue breakthrough could lead to a third contender of Judy pulling through for being a bit different.
Yeah, maybe.
It's too much alternative history for me to think about today.
Fair enough.
That, like, I can't imagine another nominee coming into this category and somehow triumphing.
Well, I think then we can sort of queue up our last segment here where we can talk about who was the runner-up to Miss Audrey Hepburn. Owen, what do you think? Who was the runner-up?
I just think based on the appeal of her film that her film had for the Academy and the fact that this was her second nomination, I guess Deborah Kerr could be considered the runner-up. Do I think she could be considered a close runner-up? No. I think, as you said earlier, Audrey Hepburn sort of handily won this award.
Mm-hmm.
But if I'm choosing one of the four losing women, I think I would feel the most comfortable with Deborah Kerr being the runner-up.
Yeah, I agree with you, actually. Yeah, I do think Deborah Kerr, I mean, the film, 13 nominations, 8 wins. Like, it was a very, very big film. So, you know, comparatively speaking, there's just, when you look at, you know, Leslie Caron or Maggie McNamara or even Ava Gardner, like, none of them even come close with their films in terms of popularity, at least. And the fact that Deborah Kerr was already in the club, she was a star, she already had a nomination. Yeah, I think, generally speaking, she probably had the slight edge, even if her screen time was very limited. And I think it's still a very good performance, despite that lack of screen time. So I think it could have happened for her. Like, she could have contended, but yeah, I think Audrey was far away the winner here. Question is, would we have voted for her? Owen, would you have voted for Audrey Hepburn, or would you have voted for someone else here?
So I would have voted for Audrey Hepburn. I think it's the timeless performance. Sure, it's sort of a typical Cinderella story of an actress sort of coming out of obscurity and getting this great role and triumphing. Yeah. I think it's an incredible performance and is my choice of the nominees that year, even though I do love what Deborah Kerr is doing, and to a lesser extent Ava Gardner. I think Audrey Hepburn is the clear choice.
Yeah, I'm also going with Audrey Hepburn here as the correct winner. I'm just jumping aboard the Audrey bandwagon. I definitely would have been swept up in the hype of Audrey in 1953. I'm not even going to pretend I wouldn't be. So, yeah, of this group, I do think she sort of towers over the rest, even though I think Ava Gardner and Deborah Kerr certainly pull off some nomination-worthy turns. Neither of them are necessarily winner feeling for me. And the other two, I never want to watch again. So, there you have it.
And hopefully you never have to.
I doubt that I will, but you never know. Owen, truly thank you so much for doing this. It was so great having you on the main show, so thank you so much.
Yeah, no, thank you for having me on. I definitely had a lot more to say than I was expecting to when you first asked me a month ago. Yes. to guest with you. So yeah, I was very thankful to come back to come on to the main show and discuss Audrey Hepburn and even discuss Deborah Kerr, who I adore, even though it's one of her lesser performances for me. It still is great to know that on the main show I got a chance to talk about Deborah Kerr.
Yeah, that's good. And maybe we'll have you back in the future for another Best Actress episode. We'll talk offline. Yes, thank you so much for listening. You can find me on Twitter at Kevin_Jacobson. The show is at Oscar Runner Up. Instagram and the Runner Up is. Rate, review, and subscribe if you haven't already. And if you like what you hear and want to hear more, patreon.com/andtherunnerup is. So next week, we've got a huge one for you. One of the years where people talk about what could have been, which is the 1954 Best Actress race. The nominees were Dorothy Dandridge for Carmen Jones, Judy Garland for A Star is Born, Audrey Hepburn back already for Sabrina, Grace Kelly for The Country Girl, and Jane Wyman for Magnificent Obsession, with the winner being Grace Kelly. So that's what to watch before next week. Thanks again, Owen.
No worries. Thank you for having me on. I look forward to listening to that 1954 episode, and whoever is chosen to guest to discuss such a prestigious race.
Yes. And with that, I will bid you all adieu.